There is a single island in the western Pacific Ocean that the entire modern world depends on. Not for oil, not for food, not for any raw material that can be found somewhere else if the supply ran out, for something far harder to replace. Taiwan manufactures more than 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips, the components that power every smartphone, every data center, every fighter jet guidance system, every AI application, every modern weapon platform on the planet. No other place on Earth comes close. The gap between Taiwan and the next closest competitor is not small. It is measured in years of research, billions of dollars of infrastructure, and a concentration of human expertise that took 3 decades to build and cannot simply be reconstructed elsewhere. Historian Chris Miller, author of Chip War, put it plainly: controlling advanced chips is like controlling oil in the 20th century, but far more concentrated. Oil has dozens of producers. Advanced chips have one. How a subtropic island that most people couldn't have found on a map in 1960 became the single most crucial manufacturing location in the history of human technology? That is the story of Taiwan's semiconductor industry. And it begins not with genius, and not with luck, but with a deliberate decision made by a government that had almost nothing and bet everything on a single idea. In the 1960s, Taiwan was a poor island, separated from mainland China after the Communist Revolution of 1949. The nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek had retreated there with 2 million soldiers and refugees and built a state from almost nothing. The economy was agricultural. The exports were textiles and cheap consumer goods. The development path looked like every other developing economy in Asia. But the Taiwanese government had been watching something happen in California. In Santa Clara Valley, American companies were producing a new kind of product. Small, improbable, increasingly powerful devices made from silicon, transistors, integrated circuits, semiconductors. The stuff that, within a generation, would become the foundation for the entire global economy. Taiwanese leaders decided this was where they wanted to go. Not textiles, not plastic toys, chips. In 1973, the government established the Industrial Technology Research Institute, ITRI, to do one thing: develop the technological capabilities Taiwan didn't yet have. It would send engineers to the United States to study at American companies, license American technology, and bring it back. It was a systemic, state-directed effort to compress decades of industrial development into years. By the early 1980s, Taiwan had semiconductor fabrication experience, a growing pool of trained engineers, and a government willing to write large checks. What it didn't have was a strategy for competing with American and Japanese giants who were already dominating the industry. That strategy was about to walk through the door. His name was Morris Chang. He was a 45-year-old, and he had an idea that nobody in the semiconductor industry had tried before. Morris Chang had spent 25 years at Texas Instruments, rising to senior vice president, running the company's global semiconductor business. He was one of the most experienced semiconductor executives in the world. And at Texas Instruments, he had watched something that most of his colleagues had missed. He had watched chip design and chip manufacturing drift apart. Design was getting more specialized, more creative, more dependent on the specific version of the people who did it. Manufacturing was getting more capital intensive, more demanding, requiring even larger investments and ever more sophisticated equipment. The two activities were pulling in different directions, and yet Every major semiconductor company was still trying to do both under the same roof, design their own chips and manufacture them in their own facilities. Chang thought this was wrong. He thought the industry was heading towards a world where chip design companies, especially smaller startups with brilliant ideas but no capital, would want to outsource their manufacturing to someone who did it exclusively, at scale, with total focus. A factory that manufactured chips for other companies rather than competing with them. Nobody had built that company. The foundry model, a pure manufacturing business with no chip design of its own, did not exist in 1985. When the Taiwanese government recruited Chang to come to Taiwan and build the country's semiconductor industry, he pitched them this idea. Not a Taiwanese version of Intel or Texas Instruments, something new. A company whose only product was manufacturing excellence, that would work on any chip designer, compete with none of them, and attract customers precisely because it posed no competitive threat to them. Texas Instruments said no when Taiwan asked them to invest. Intel said no. Only Philips, the Dutch technology company, agreed, putting in $58 million and licensing its product technology in exchange for 27.6% stake. The government of Taiwan funded the rest, and in 1987, at the age of 56, Morris Chang founded Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. Its first American customer was Intel, which used TSMC to manufacture older generation chips, so Intel could free up its own capacity for leading-edge products. Landing Intel as a customer within the first year was a signal to the entire industry. This was real. The foundry model worked for a reason that had become clearer with every passing year. Chip design was becoming more expensive and more specialized, while chip manufacturing was becoming more capital intensive than almost any other business in the history of human industry. Building a single state-of-the-art fabrication plant, a fab, cost upwards of $15 to $20 billion. The equipment inside it, built to tolerances measured in atoms. The ASML Extreme Ultraviolet Lithography machine that etches the smallest circuits onto the silicon wafers cost more than $150 million each, and are so complex that only one company in the world can build them. A semiconductor fab is arguably the most sophisticated manufacturing environment ever created by human beings. TSMC invested in this infrastructure with a ferocity no chip designer could match. Because chip design companies didn't need to. They could outsource it to TSMC and put their capital into design instead. This created a virtuous cycle. The more customers TSMC attracted, the more revenue it had to reinvest in better manufacturing technologies. The better its manufacturing technology, the more customers it attracted. The numbers are staggering. In 2003, a down year for the semiconductor industry, TSMC alone spent approximately $40 billion on capital expenditure and research and development. The entire US CHIPS Act, the most ambitious government semiconductor investment program in American history, committed $52 billion over multiple years. TSMC spent nearly that in a single year. By the early 2020s, TSMC was manufacturing chips for Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm, Broadcom, MediaTek, and dozens of other companies. Its customers included virtually every major technology company on Earth. Apple's iPhone processor, Nvidia's AI chips powering the data centers running ChatGPT, and every other major AI system. AMD's processors, the guidance systems in Americans' military hardware, all of it made in Taiwan. And the gap between TSMC and everyone else kept growing. While competitors stalled at older process nodes, TSMC reached 7 nanometers, then 5, then 3, then 2. each generation packing more transistors into a smaller space, delivering more performance and less power consumption. A 2 nanometer chip delivers 45% better performance than a 7 nanometer chip, while using 75% less power. Morris Chang described the trajectory with characteristic precision. In the 1950s, a single transistor cost $2 or $3. Today, a smartphone contains 10 to 20 billion transistors. The cost of a single transistor is now $1 nanodollar, 1 billionth of a dollar. The relentless cheapening on computer power is what made technology ambiguous, and TSMC is the engine that made the cheapening possible. Taiwan has a problem that has nothing to do with semiconductors and everything to do with geography and history. China regards Taiwan as a breakaway province that will eventually be reunified with the mainland, by negotiations if possible, by force if necessary. The People's Liberation Army has conducted military exercises around Taiwan with increasing frequency and scale. Chinese military officials have publicly discussed blockade scenarios. Taiwan's defense ministry has reported Chinese military aircraft entering its air defense zone more than 200 times a month. The question that keeps strategists and executives and defense planners up at night is whether Taiwan's semiconductor dominance makes it safer or more dangerous. The theory of the Silicon Shield goes like this: the world's most powerful economies depend on chips made in Taiwan. China depends on chips made in Taiwan. In 2023, China purchased more than half of all Taiwanese semiconductor exports. A war over Taiwan would disrupt chip production so catastrophically that every major economy on the earth would suffer immediate and severe consequences. Therefore, no rational actor would risk it. The counter-argument is equally sobering. If Taiwan's chips are so valuable, China has every reason to want to control them, not destroy them. A scenario in which China gains indirect control over Taiwan through coercion, blockade, or political pressure, rather than outright military conquest, is one in which Beijing decides who gets access to TSMC's manufacturing capacity and who doesn't. That scenario is arguably more dangerous than an invasion, precisely because it is more plausible. And there is the harder problem still. TSMC's fabs are extraordinarily complex ecosystems, not just buildings with machines in them. They depend on Dutch lithography equipment from ASML, Chinese chemicals, American design software, a workforce of tens of thousands of specialized engineers who have spent years or decades learning to operate at a frontier that physics allow. Even if the buildings survive a conflict intact, the fabs would not operate without a global supply chain that feeds them. TSMC's own chairman has stated publicly that the fabs would be inoperable without their external connections. The chips cannot simply be seized, but they can be denied to the world, either by conflict that destroys the fabs or by political control that turns them into leverage. This is why the United States, Europe, Japan, and South Korea have all launched massive programs to build semiconductor manufacturing capacity at home. The US CHIPS and Science Act committed more than $52 billion in subsidies. TSMC itself has committed more than $165 billion to a sprawling fabrication complex in Arizona, the most advanced processes initially reserved for Taiwan, but the future generations to be produced on American soil. Morris Chang, characteristically, was skeptical. He told a Brookings Institute audience that moving semiconductor manufacturing to the United States would be a very expensive and wasteful exercise in fertility, that manufacturing costs in the US are at least 50% higher than Taiwan, possibly double, and that this cost difference would ultimately make American-made chips uncompetitive. He's not wrong about the economics, but the people driving the policy were not primarily thinking about economics. What Taiwan built in 30 years is unprecedented. There is no historical parallel for a single location achieving and sustaining this level of dominance in a technology so fundamental to modern economy and the modern military. Oil has Saudi Arabia, Russia, the Gulf states, and dozens of other producers. Rare earth minerals have China, but also deposits across multiple continents. Advanced semiconductor manufacturing, the kind that produces the chips in your phone, the chips training AI systems, the chips guiding precision weapons, has Taiwan. One island, one company producing 90% of what the world's most advanced technology requires. That concentration is both the source of Taiwan's extraordinary importance and its most dangerous vulnerability. It is what gives a 23 million person island leverage over the most powerful nations on Earth. And it is what makes the question of Taiwan's political status something that great powers are willing to spend trillions of dollars and potentially risk war over. Morris Chang once described what Taiwan had built as a puzzle that came together from several pieces. The insight that chips would become ambiguous, the technology that made miniaturization possible, the foundry model that made specialization variable, and Taiwan itself, a government that bet everything on the right idea at the right moment, a work culture that produced engineering excellence to execute it, and a generation of people who built something the world has never seen before. The puzzle took 30 years to assemble. It cannot be reassembled quickly elsewhere. In the entire global economy, every AI system, every smartphone, every modern weapons platform runs on the assumption that the assembly line keeps running. Whether it continues to run, or under whose authority, is the defining technological and geographical question of the next decade.